All right, we're going to take a quick look at Wing Leader. This is the Victories game, the first game in the series. Covers air battles from 1940 to 1942. Relatively new game. I've been playing it quite a bit. Thought I'd display some of the gameplay real quick. There's a couple reviews up, but I think the game deserves just a little look at how do you actually play it. The rules are rather thick, but once you get into it, the game is actually relatively easy to play. 2 player aid charts cover most of what you need to play. Some of the things as you're playing it out aren't going to be super effective, so maybe it feels like you're not doing it right or something else should be happening. So I wanted to kind of cover some of that. I'm not really going to talk about what I think of the game. I'll cover that on the Advanced After Combat podcast in January. But just kind of wanted to give a quick how do you actually play the game. So here's the map. And the map is a grid of the sky looking in the Z direction, I guess. Or maybe in the Y direction. So the ground is down here, and then this is all sky. All right. We're going to be looking at scenario number 10, number 9, like arrows against the gladiators. It's Italians as the defenders and the British as the raiders. And what that means is basically the British are coming in to drop some bombs in this case, and the Italians are trying to hold them off. But really ends up being toward the British are trying to defend their bomber, in this case bombers, while the Italians are also trying to defend their ground units. And it's a victory point game, so you get a number of victory points based on enemy losses and ground units. You can see here this is worth 10 victory points if you can destroy it a little bit. And if you destroy it completely, you can get more victory points out of that, but we'll cover all that later. So what we have on the map are airplane counters. And you can see these are double-sided, which is kind of nice. No other ratings or anything on it. This R is just an identifier that coincides to these over here, and so that you can keep track of everything you have. All of the stats are handled by these, what the game calls APCs, the aircraft cards. And it covers things like speed and turn, which are only used in combat. That's not actually movement speed, that's combat speed. And then how many movement points it takes to climb. Bombers have a bomb rating. And then we have a defensive rating here, a bomb sight, protection, and firepower. So we'll cover how you play the game. Once you get into it, it goes pretty quickly, which makes it super enjoyable because the action ends up being pretty fast, pretty furious. We have some broken clouds here and here, which will affect weather. So what's happening is these 2 bombers here are trying to bomb either this flak site or the supply depot here. These are both in the same hex or grid square, but I'm putting them there just because I like to be able to see it, and then they're in line with the ground. So let's look at our sequence of play setup. If as you get into later scenarios, squadrons will come in on later turns, and that's where this would happen. And then for those flights or squadrons coming in, you'll place a vector marker. Actually, let's back up just a little bit and look at our setup. So the Italians have an A fighter and a B fighter. They're both alerted. They're both on intercept missions, which dictates how they can move. I'm not going to get into all of the super specifics of that stuff. S&T on the British are the bombers. They're obviously on bombing runs, right? And they have a bomb load. And so that's going to make them slower in combat. Their speed and turn are both -1. Q is on an escort mission, or an escort mission, and so it's basically going to move along with the bombers. And then R is on sweep, and it's kind of scouting out ahead, trying to engage the enemy. So that's what we have. All of the status markers and that kind of thing will be tracked on these wing displays. Things such as being disrupted or broken, having low ammunition, getting losses inflicted, having stragglers, that whole thing. And you'll see that as we go along. So these are both squadrons. If it just has a single plane like this, it's a flight. It's just the number of aircraft involved in that formation. So they come on and they place a vector. Now, if you're on intercept and you don't have a tally on an enemy, you have to fly toward your vector. And that's just kind of the meetup point where they'll circle until something else happens. So that's step 2. Now we have our tally phase. And what happens there is you're going to try to get a tally on an enemy. And that will dictate combat, movement, all sorts of things. You need a tally in order to react. So nobody has a tally on anybody, and you mark that with the other side of the vector marker. Because it's one or the other, you either have a vector or a tally. And to do that, you're going to roll a die and then modify it. But because it's a single die, you need to be really more or less within 6, 2, 3, what are we doing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So way out of tally range. So they're not even going to roll for a tally. They're not even going to roll for a tally. Okay, so we're moving right along. And then the movement phase, squadrons are going to move. And we have our move order here. Dogfights will move. We don't have any dogfights. Nothing's happened yet. And then escorts. So when you're on an escort run, unless you have a tally, which will then change your movement profile, you just move 2 movement points. Diving, if you're a fighter, will get you an additional movement point. In this case, it won't do that. But they're going to want to dive because these guys are bombing. They're going to need to get lower in order to be effective. The scenario rules suggest altitude 5 in order to bomb. They're currently at 8. So the escorts kind of have to anticipate, and it's the same player, so you don't really have to anticipate, but follow along with what the bombers are going to do in movement. So what they're going to do is move 1, 2, just like that. Bombers now move, and they're going to do the same thing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, we can mark these guys with a dive if we were so inclined, which would affect combat, but no combat's going to happen. So we're not even going to mess with that right now. Next, unalerted fighters move in initiative order. And initiative order is lowest altitude up and then by speed. So these guys are unalerted, so they're just going to move 1, 2, like that. So now these fighters are alerted, so they have 3 movement points, and they get to move next. Actually, let me check that he doesn't get 3 also. That's correct. Huzzah. Unalerted fighters get 2 movement points. So these guys have 3 because they are alerted, and that's dictated by the scenario rules, but they have to move up to here. And here, we're going to look at our altitude. We're currently in altitude 4, so that's going to cost 2 movement points to climb 1. Moving more than 90 degrees in rotation costs 1 movement point. Otherwise, to move forward or within your 1 movement point climb costs 1. So for us to move from here at a 45-degree angle, and we can move it if we want to, just to kind of get fancy, that's going to cost 2 movement points, and then 3, these guys will do the same. But we're going to keep him flat. So this is 2, and that's only going to cost 1. Let's see, where do we start? So he can go to there for 1, and there for 3. I'm actually going to just leave him like that. So that's movement, right? Nothing else happens. There's no combat or anything. No combat. Combat takes place when 2 squadrons, 2 flights are in the same square. So then we move on and we do it again. The raiders actually get to try to tally first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let me look at the modifiers to see if they can get there. They cannot. They would need I think a +2 or a +3, but they don't apply for any of those. Plus, there's weather here, which is going to affect them. So we will continue on with movement, and again, the escorts will move 1, 2. The bombers will move 1, 2, and let's see. Weather doesn't affect movement. Okay, so we're good there. Go 1, 2. These guys now get to move. They're going to stay a little bit high. 2. And now these guys get to move. But they still have to move up toward this. So they can move 2, 3, or just stay there at 2. And I think that's what they're going to do. They're going to go 2. We move to another turn. Now we can probably get some tallies going on. So the gladiator is going to try to tally B here. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 away. What modifiers do we have? Doesn't look like we have any. Nope. So it's going to be straight up 5 or 6. I'm going to use my 2d6 or double d6 dice I got from Kickstarter here. It's the British, so maybe let's use blue. So on a 5 or 6. He gets it. So R now becomes alerted. Thusly, and puts their tally marker here. And that will come into play. That's all that can happen. He can't really get to either of these guys, but now they can try to tally them. So B will try to tally R, which is also a 5 or 6. Italians will use the black. That fails. A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, minus 1. Minus 2. Minus 1 for the weather, right? Actually, that's broken, so that's minus 3. Minus 2 for the broken cloud, because the line of sight goes through that square. And also minus 1 for being green, so he can't get there either. Italians, yep. Okay, so we're not even going to roll it because he can't get there. We will go on to movement now. This gladiator is going to keep rolling. 1, 2. Actually, do they want to drop? Maybe they want to drop. So they'll go 1, 2, 1, 2. And maybe I should be marking those, but I'm not going to. And these would have been marked with climbs from before. Okay, now the gladiator. And actually, so we skip right by unalerted fighters because everyone, all the fighters are alerted other than this escort, but he moves differently. So we're in alerted fighters. So he actually gets to move first because he's at the lowest altitude. And he's probably, well, he has to move still toward his vector. So he does that, and that cost him 2. He could then get here, but he doesn't want to do that. Now we need to figure out between B and R, this gladiator and this Freccia, who moves first. So they're at altitude 6. So the lower speed is actually going to get to move first because you want to move second. Actually, let me verify that. Yep, it's actually right here. I didn't even need to get in the rules. See, these charts are super handy. So lowest basic speed. Okay, so he's at a 3. The Freccia is at a 4. So he has to go first. And he gets 3 movement points now because he's alerted. So he's going to go 1, 2. Actually, he's going to go 2, 3. And he climbed. Now, this Freccia, get the shadow out of the way, still isn't tallied, so has to move thusly. And they're climbed. Okay, still no combat. I take these off in the administration phase, or the setup sequence rather. No, actually I do it down here. It doesn't super matter. All right, let's go into another turn. You can see this once you're pretty familiar, it goes pretty quickly. So R is tallied. He could choose, or they could choose. It's probably a man, considering it's World War II. Flying that thing. Anyway, he could choose to tally this guy, but he doesn't want to do that. So Bravo is going to try to tally him now. That's a 2. Let's see. Yep, so it's just a 2. 2 or more, he gets it. So B is tallied on R, which is good. If you don't have a tally on somebody and they attack you, it's potentially bad. A is going to try to tally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This bomber. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Minus, that's -3 again, so we can't get there. Which is unfortunate. So I think he's actually going to not try to tally that guy. We'll move into movement again. These guys are just going to roll with where they are. 1, 2, 2, 2. Now we have this again. This guy gets to move first. He's going to move there. Now the gladiator has to move first, which really gives Bravo a lot of options as to what they do. So the gladiator is going to move like that. So this is where things get tricky. So does Bravo want to attack? I don't know. Let's think about that for a second. So what I didn't mention is, even if Bravo wasn't the next to go, since he has a tally on this guy, as soon as he moves, he gets to move. If you have a tally on someone, you move immediately after them. So going back to this situation, if Bravo had had a tally on this bomber, even though he was lower in altitude here, as soon as the bomber moves, if he has a tally, he moves immediately after him. So even if this guy wasn't the next to move, he would move immediately after. And he doesn't want to engage that fighter in combat. He wants to get down here and engage. So he's free to move, even though he has a tally here, he's free to move as he pleases. So he's going to go like this. That's 1, 2, 3. Actually, does he want to do that? 3. Okay, so I moved 1, 2, and since I dove, I get an extra movement point if I wanted it. But I don't want to attack this guy without having a tally on it. So we'll leave that turn like that, I think.